past year or so, I've had many lovely letters complimenting me about the Treebobs stories, but asking how the Treebobs came about, and indeed what a Treebob actually is. So the story you're going to hear today is all about how the Treebobs came to be. There was once a group of small and friendly elves who lived at the edge of a river. They were very content. The river gave them everything they needed to live very happily. Its clear water was perfect to drink and grow all of their crops. It provided clay so they could build their little houses, and it provided reeds from which they were able to weave so many things. All was well and happy. Then, one day, one of the elves noticed that the flow of the river was not as fast as it once was. Over the days that followed, the river grew less and less. The river was drying up, and not one of them could understand why. The Queen of the Elves sent out a scouting party to travel the length of the river to find out what was happening. On their return, they brought back the most terrible news. A great wall was being built across the river to form a huge lake behind it. Some of the elves heard the men who were building it talking to each other. A new town had been built in the valley, and all the water that was being collected behind the wall, what they called a dam, was needed for this new town. The elves told of how many animals they had seen who were already leaving, and of how many beautiful flowers were dying. On hearing the news, the Queen of the Elves called her council for a meeting to ask their advice. "If we stay," she said, "we are surely doomed, for this river is everything to us and we cannot live or manage without it." "Then we must leave," answered the council. "And go where?" answered the Queen. "I don't know, but far away from here, where we can start again and live in safety. We must hope that fortune will guide us." After more debate, a vote was taken. The Queen announced that they would move. The elves began to do all that was needed to leave their valley. They filled large clay pots with what little water was still flowing down from the river. They collected stores of food, reeds and tools, and just as the last drop of water passed through the river, they said goodbye to the only home they had ever known and set off. Those poor little elves walked for such a long time and camped out in fields and in caves. They walked through valleys and across mountains, searching for a new home. In all this time, they never lost faith, and their beautiful queen always stayed strong, leading them forward. Just when the very last of their food and water was running out, they came across a valley in the middle of the mountains in which stood a very dense forest. They could see in the middle of it rivers and waterfalls. It was quite the most magical place they had ever seen. They were overjoyed. They had found the new home they had been searching for. They wandered deep into the forest. They tasted the berries that were growing and picked the fruit from the trees. It was all wonderful. But what they did not know was that this forest was indeed magical and inhabited by many magical creatures, and some of them were very bad indeed. One of these creatures was a wicked witch who was known as Rotten Rena. On the day the elves were to meet her for the first time, she was in a very wicked mood indeed. When she saw the weary elves passing through the forest past her cottage, looking for a river they had seen from the top of the mountain, she jumped out on them. "Oh, yes," she said in her wicked cackling voice. "And what's all this then?" The poor elf queen was quite shocked at the sight of Rotten Rena, who, with her garish clothes and wild hair, was a frightening sight indeed. "I beg your pardon," said the Queen very politely. "My people are just passing through this part of the forest on our way to the river." "Oh, really?" said Rotten Rena. So it's water that you're after, is it? Well, yes it is, replied the Queen. Well then, Rotten Rena said, a truly wicked grin appearing on her face. You should have tried to find me sooner. I can give you lots of water. In fact, I can make sure you have nothing but. Oh no, it's quite all right, said the poor Queen, trying to back away from this dreadful creature. We just need to get to the river, and all will be well. But thank you all the same. Oh, but I insist, shrieked Rotten Rena, pulling out her wand, which was a long black stick with a burnt black end. Before any of the elves could say another word, the wicked witch cast a most wicked spell indeed. She waved her wand and turned the Queen and all the other elves into ice statues. She let out a terrible cackling laugh. There you are, as I said, nothing but water. Of course, none of the poor little elves could answer, as they had all been turned to ice. Rotten Rena stalked off into the forest, laughing at her own detestable wickedness. Now, you might be thinking that all was lost for the poor little elves. There they all were, as ice statues, and starting to melt in the mid-morning sun. However, they had all met Rotten Rena at the base of a magic sycamore tree that was inhabited by good and kind fairies. One of them, called Bindweed Belle, had seen everything that had happened, and she, together with Foxglove Philip, flew down from the tree to see if they could help. We cannot reverse Rotten Rena's spell, said Foxglove Philip. It's just too powerful. I know, agreed Bindweed Belle, but I'm sure the tree can help. As she said this, the old tree swayed some of its branches, which in itself was very magical, as there was no wind blowing to make them sway. Bindweed Belle raised her magic wand, which had a tiny little star on the end, and said a magic spell. Instantly, all of the elves began melting very quickly indeed. That's no good, said Foxglove Philip. Now they are melting much faster. Look, said Bindweed Belle. As Foxglove Philip looked, he saw the roots of the sycamore tree had reached out and caught every drop of water from the melting ice statues. Every tiny drop was soaked up by the wonderful magic roots of the great old sycamore tree. When every last drop had been caught, Bindweed Belle and Foxglove Philip flapped their tiny little wings and flew right to the top of the tree. There, on the uppermost branches, they found hundreds of acorns growing next to very many sycamore seeds. They were growing much faster than ordinary acorns and were much bigger. After a few minutes, they were very large. Then they all turned brown and finally split down the middle and opened up to reveal a safe and sleeping elf in each one. The sycamore tree, with Bindweed Belle's help, had broken Rotten Rena's wicked spell and changed all of the elves back. The Queen Elf was enormously grateful, but also a little sad. We have travelled so far to find a new home, she explained. When we saw this beautiful forest, we thought we had found it, but how can we stay with a wicked witch on the prowl? Well, you can stay here, offered Bindweed Belle. Many creatures live on this tree, and we all get on very well together. Cautioned Foxglove Philip. The only thing is, it would help if you could fly. Everyone who lives here can bob about on wings, which makes living on a tree much easier. I know, answered Bindweed Belle excitedly. She picked up one half of an acorn shell that one of the elves had just popped out of. In the middle of it she stood a twig from the tree, and onto this she hung 2 sycamore seeds from the top. Then she waved her magic wand, and the whole thing became much sturdier. Give it a try, she said to one of the elves. Way! He shrieked excitedly as the sycamore seed spun and lifted the whole thing into the air. The elf held onto the branch and found he was able to steer and fly at the same time, ducking, diving, and simply bobbing about under the branches of the tree. It's a flying pip! He shouted with excitement as he once again buzzed around their heads. All of the other elves cheered and waved. There you are, said Bindweed Bell. Now you can use these flying pips to collect everything you need from the forest and make your home here. I promise you, there isn't a spell Rottenrena has that cannot be outsmarted by the magic that is in this tree. The Queen and all the elves were so grateful to Bindweed Bell and Foxglove Philip and all the other fairies of the sycamore tree. They all agreed to stay and built tree houses to live in and flying pips to travel in. From then on, because they lived on a tree and bobbed under and over the branches in their flying pips, everyone else who lived on the tree, the fairies included, nicknamed them the Treebobs, and so the name came about. Oh, and as far as Rottenrena was concerned, well, she had not gone very far away, and there were plenty of things to come from her. The end.